I would say I don't see things taking longer now than they have in the past, but I will tell you that urgency is the name of the game for me.
Okay.
Because time kills deals.
Absolutely.
And I get really frustrated when the other counterparties that I'm dealing with, whether it be my client as the landlord or tenant or the other party or their attorney, drags their feet because there's nothing more dangerous.
Hello again, everybody. Welcome to the Zelnik Exchange. I am your host, Corey Zelnik, and today I have the pleasure of spending some time with Ellen Sinreich.
Hi, Corey.
Hi, Ellen. Ellen runs the Sinreich Group. She is an attorney at law here in New York City and has been for some time. And I look forward to getting a verbal resume from her and hearing her story. It's a very good one. It's an interesting one. We're going to go from elementary school, I'll fill that in later, all the way up to a game of Monopoly. And we will see what that's all about. So, Ellen, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, Corey.
I'm so glad. I know we've talked about this.
Yes.
You and I had the pleasure of meeting each other IRL in real life, right, at the
Yeah.
real estate gala. We met through some mutual friends. We had a conversation, and I guess we'll go right to it. In the course of our meetup, we found out that we went to the same elementary school together.
Amazing, because that school has not come up in how many decades? I can't even remember.
Yeah, that's a bunch of decades for both of us. We won't put a number on it, but shout out to PS 117 in Briarwood, Queens, straight up the hill, and that was just very funny. It made us both laugh hysterically, right? Because I don't think either one of us have ever talked about it in forever.
Right. It's truly an unusual coincidence.
Yes, it is, and that's just part of the story of New York City and this business. And when it all is said and done, the world is this small.
That's right.
Right?
6 degrees of separation.
You got it. So, Ellen, you are a practicing attorney here. You're running your own practice. Your bio speaks to working in-house at DLC. You worked at Paul Weiss, things like that. Why don't you take us back to the beginning? How did it all start?
Well, I decided to go to law school straight out of college, went to Columbia Law School, and then went directly to Paul Weiss in the real estate group. And I have to say that I had a professor who was so inspiring, who taught us an advanced real estate course in law school. I just knew that was my direction. So I was at Paul Weiss, which is a terrific experience, especially for, grounding you and figuring out actually how to practice law.
Right.
And I think most real estate attorneys, certainly for me this was the case, I always dreamed of having my own portfolio.
Okay.
And it seemed to be a very big step to go from the cushy environment of Paul Weiss to, driving around alone in my car looking for properties.
And so let me ask you, when you
Yeah.
when you make that mention, because sometimes what has happened, and I've spoken to attorneys over the years, you could work at a Paul Weiss and bill $1,000 an hour, but you're probably not doing that right out of school. Oftentimes, attorneys are witness to what owners are making or what brokers are making. Was there an economic lure to it, or you just wanted your hands on your own stuff? What was the thinking, if there was?
Absolutely an economic lure.
Okay.
For sure. But it went more than just economics. I don't think I'm primarily motivated by money. It just seemed exciting. It seemed thrilling to be able to sort of build an empire, if you will.
Okay.
Because those are the clients that we had at Paul Weiss.
All right.
And so it was an aspiration. But I took a step. There was a step I took before that. So I decided that becoming a broker would be a stepping stone to actually owning properties, that I would get an education into how to evaluate properties, how to price them, and how to select them. So I spent a year at a small brokerage company doing investment sales, and I have to admit that it was just not for me.
Okay.
Very, very tough. I think the world of you, because being a broker is an emotional roller coaster.
Oh, sure. How long were you at the brokerage company?
1 year.
Okay. I think that there's probably an argument to be made that maybe not long enough from a trial run perspective, but there's also an argument to be made that, hey, you realized it wasn't for you and you needed to divert. And yes, we are in the stomach churning business. It's every day. We wait, oftentimes, not often, I think almost every day, we wake up unemployed. We wake up unemployed every single day. And that is not for the faint of heart, to say the least. So kudos to you. You gave it a shot.
I gave it a shot.
Okay.
And, my father was an entrepreneur.
All right.
So he was in the garment center. And he loved what he did. And I think that just became part of my DNA. So I really didn't want to go back to work for someone else. So what did I know how to do? Practice law. So I set up my own law firm in my apartment, put my bookshelves together, really bootstrapped it. And actually the RTC and FDIC really gave me the chance to fly. And that's how I was able to scale my firm.
And that was the start of the Sinreich Group?
That was the start of my first law firm, Sinreich and Associates. I have 3 companies that I've had.
Okay.
And so I moved into an office, and I joined ICSC, and I joined ULI, and I started networking, and I started to do commercial leasing. And I loved it.
All right, good for you.
I had never done a retail lease at Paul Weiss.
All right, so we could chat all about that stuff, but you mentioned ICSC. Explain. I saw something. You have a prominent role with the ICSC now?
Yes, actually I do. I am the incoming chair of the Legal Advisory Council. You did your homework, Ari.
Yes, I did.
And that is a group of 16 attorneys from across the country that advise ICSC's general counsel on the top legal issues, retail legal issues affecting our industry of the day. So it's quite an honor.
And is that set up as an educational type thing for the ICSC organization?
No.
Okay, tell me more about this.
So we meet a few times a year, and we have in-house attorneys, we have outside counsel like myself, and people from government, and we advise the general counsel on what industries are uppermost on the mind of members of the ICSC. In addition, ICSC will submit amicus briefs when a member of ICSC has a court case that is of interest generally to our industry. So we advise the general counsel on when to submit those briefs and what they,
all right, I
content
got to break this one down a little bit.
Yeah.
I'm an ICSC member, have been for years. I have a legal issue. I have a case.
You're being sued or you're suing someone.
Right, something like that. Is that something that your group gets involved with, or you eyeball it and assess it?
Well, you can submit it to us.
Okay.
And ask us to submit a brief in your favor. We will evaluate it if it rises to the level of being of interest generally to the members. So I'll give you an example.
Please.
There was a member of ICSC, an attorney, which is, and something very relevant to me, who was licensed in New Jersey but was working on a lease in Chicago. And she worked nationally, as many attorneys do, especially in our business of leasing.
Sure.
She was her client became upset with her, not because she didn't do a good job, I believe, but because it didn't work out in his favor. And he brought her up on disciplinary charges in the state of Illinois.
All right.
Well, Illinois went to New Jersey and asked that she be disbarred.
Wow.
For practicing in a state where she was not licensed.
So that was purely a licensing issue. It wasn't about what happened in the transaction or whatever the issue was.
No, it wasn't. It was a licensing issue. Okay. Now, ICSC has many attorneys who are members. Right. And many of them do practice across state lines because a retail lease is a retail lease.
We don't like to believe because, by the way, some of those same rules apply for brokers. You need to be licensed in states. Certain states have reciprocity, but most don't. And so you really do need to be licensed. And if someone, quite frankly, really wants to bust chops.
Right. Bust chops is the right way to put it. They wanted to bust her chops.
So does your group get behind her to protect her?
Well, we don't get behind her to protect her. She was with a firm, and she certainly had people who, attorneys, fighting on her behalf. Now, there are exceptions to the rule. Because if it's not if she was practicing solely on leases in Illinois, then she might be breaking rules. But this was a one-off thing, and it was part of her general practice. And I don't want to go into the technicalities, but we did submit an amicus brief in that case, talking about how it is it is kind of standard in the industry for this to happen here and there. And eventually, she was found not to be in the wrong. She was not disbarred. Okay. But that was one example of a case that we took. Another example was a slip and fall case somewhere in the Midwest. And what is the standard of care that a landlord or a tenant must provide in their store or their shopping center not to be found guilty of negligence?
All right, so that bodes my curiosity. All the landlords, all the tenants, all have insurance and all this stuff. So what gets it all the way to you? right? That attorney, that owner at that shopping center has counsel, has insurance. How does it get all the way up the ladder?
It gets to us when it gets to the point where the case is being appealed to a higher court, not a district court level or state court level case. And the findings seem to be inconsistent with what is generally thought to be, the appropriate outcome of the case, where we look at it and we feel our members could be severely negatively impacted if the ultimate high court ruling goes against one party or another, and where we think that the merits, the legal merits, not so much the factual parties, are not what the court has found, which is being appealed, and then we would get involved. So it's a judgment call, and the 16 people on our committee, our council, make that judgment and give advice to the general counsel as to whether they should submit an amicus brief. Those are just two examples of the type of cases that we might get involved in.
Give us the bumper sticker definition of amicus brief, because we said it 4 times.
Friend of the court.
There you go.
We're not a party. We don't have standing.
All right, good. I like it. We learn something new every day. But the whole legal aspect of ICSC and the group that you have within the organization is interesting to know. I had not known that at all. Paul Weiss, brokerage. You did some time at DLC, landlord, in-house counsel. What was that experience like?
So DLC was amazing. I joined DLC. Adam and his father, Steve, who founded the company, Adam Ifshin, they had about 25 properties, and I met Adam because I was the head of government relations for New York State at the time for ICSC, and Adam, was very and has been always very involved with what's going on in Washington and Albany, very active participant. We got to know each other because he was on my committee.
Sure.
He then hired my firm, the Sinreich and Associates at the time, to do all of his leasing work.
Oh, great.
And it was a fabulous relationship. I loved working for them. They liked me. And he got to the point where he needed to bring that function in-house. So he sort of twisted my arm over a 6-month period. He's very persuasive. And convinced me to come in-house and start his first legal department, which I did, and I was there for 6 years.
Oh, nice. And so we always look, like we said earlier, about being unemployed on a regular basis, and we always look from the brokerage perspective as, we don't have a job. Okay, now you go work for, you've had some experience working for a firm, and now you're back in-house, and so you have a job now. And how was that, from the Paul Weiss learning the business, the brokerage independence, back in the world, and now working for somebody? I know you have a great relationship with Adam, you mentioned it, but how was it working in-house?
Well, it took some getting used to.
Yeah, I'd imagine.
It took some getting used to. I wasn't used to having to have somebody approve what days I was taking off for vacation, little things like that.
Those are the things.
It's like, huh? But you have to be a team player, and DLC was a fabulous experience because it was another education from the ground up. What does it mean to run an operating real estate company with all the risks and moving pieces? I mean, it was fascinating. It was really fascinating.
Development deals, leasing deals, all of the above? Yeah,
all of the above. I mean, DLC had outside counsel that helped in their acquisitions, but all the operational issues primarily are what I focused on.
Oh, that's great. That's great. I mean, and certainly a fabulous look on the resume. DLC is, one of the biggest names in our industry.
Oh, absolutely.
For however many years. Prior to taping the show, we were talking about some experiences that you've had, and let's talk about another one. Tell me about Long Island and Fortunoff and a big event in your career.
Yes, that was amazing. So at Sinreich and Associates, before I joined DLC, one of the most exciting deals that I've ever worked on is Mel Simon and Alan Fortunoff had agreed to joint venture to develop The Source, a regional mall in Westbury, Long Island. And I had met Mel socially at different real estate events because that's how I was building my business, by networking and getting out there.
Through ICSC at some point?
This wasn't through ICSC, but through ICSC, ULI, and wherever I could wherever I could find myself. In any case, they hired me to do all the leasing for this regional mall. So flew me out to Indianapolis to meet with their general counsel. I mean, for a small law firm owner, that was kind of an out-of-body experience.
I'm sure.
And we negotiated with Saks Fifth Avenue, Nordstrom's, Bertolini's, Cheesecake Factory. And
so you mentioned the big names. half a step back. Let's put some context to this, because you and I are from a little bit of a different era, and we have different people that follow the show. Mel Simon, now it's Simon Properties. Mel is no longer with us. I know he's passed, and his son runs the biggest mall shopping center operator in the country, maybe if not the world. Fortunoff back then was a monster name. I guess you would say jewelry, home goods. They were sort of everything, right? They just sort of, years ago, Fortunoff had a store on Fifth Avenue in the 50s. They had a flagship store in the 50s. Yes. And so, but, if you're from Long Island, suburbia, they were you get like your lawn furniture, your pool furniture, right? All that.
When you go away to college, you buy all the stuff for your room. When you buy your first apartment.
Right. This is all pre Bed Bath and Beyond.
Yes.
And all of that stuff.
Well, they were kind of a precursor.
Yes.
To Bed Bath
absolutely.
and Beyond. Yeah.
And then, but they were dominant players. Right? And they controlled that real estate. I would imagine.
They controlled that real estate in Westbury
in.
and brought Mel in
Right.
because Alan Fortunoff, who was running the business, I think his parents or grandparents started it, saw the handwriting on the wall, I guess, and he thought that in order to continue to be really profitable, he needed the rest of the retail world to be there alongside him in Westbury.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So he contributed the land, Mel, the development expertise.
Sure, and the leasing expertise, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And you started to rattle off some
names
prominent
of
names.
the anchor tenants. Yeah,
Sure.
I mean, it was the who's who of retail.
Of suburban retail.
Suburban retail.
Right, because you rattled off those names, and because I'm doing this for a long time, most of those players, I recognize every single name. None of them were city folk.
Right, that's true.
Right?
Now they are. I mean, Saks, Nordstrom's, yeah.
Yes, no, they've all
Cosmetics
made their way.
Plus, remember them?
Yes, of course. But we've never had a cheesecake factory here in Manhattan.
That's right. Can you rectify that?
But if me and every broker that is licensed by the city of New York has tried to pull that off in some way, shape, or form, I promise you, in the course of their career.
Don't you think they'd be fabulous, like in a Times Square area or
you would
near
think,
Rock Center?
You would think, but a lot of those tenants they hear the number. They hear the number while volume is there.
Yes.
Gross volume is there. The net number is not always as sexy. And I think that they've all kicked the tires back a whole bunch of years ago when Forrest City Ratner got involved around the city and was developing these.
A former client of mine.
Oh, yeah. There you go. When he was I have a funny Bruce Ratner story. When he was going around the city and doing these type of developments, I'm sure he had every conversation with Cheesecake and all of those things, but they never seem to land here in the city. I'm trying to think, as we speak, if they're somewhere in the outer boroughs. They may be in Queens Center Mall, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, they never made it into Manhattan. My quick side note on Bruce Ratner: I went to a luncheon. This is pre Barclays.
Wow.
Okay, so this is. Or he was underway with Barclays. Mm-hmm. It was it was like the Rebney holiday lunch, 3,000 brokers in a room. And he says, look, there's two things that a developer has, and there are very few of us, especially here in New York City, that make us who we are. One is a whole bunch of money, and two is a pair. Because, and you know this, how much time it takes, markets change, zoning changes, all of those things. And so he was coming out of the ground at the time with Barclays, and we all know subsequently what happened thereafter. But yeah, so, Ratner went through that run, and I was still friends with Sandeep Mathrani, who was running his leasing at the time. I'm sure you know Sandeep, when they were doing all those centers around the boroughs.
Yeah.
So it was very interesting. So you put together this project. What is your involvement with this project? You're the leasing agent the
leasing
legal
attorney
for Simon / Fortunoff. You're
outside counsel.
Outside counsel working for the landlord, developer.
Yes.
Right.
And we did all the retail leasing in-house and anchors.
Okay.
And it was just an amazing experience.
I'm sure. And so when you look at a suburban ground-up development like that, you don't have it as much in the city. I know a prominent discussion is always delivery and the timing of delivery. and the penalties that come with
Critical,
delay. Critical, right? So tell me a little bit about that, and then I'm going to ask you about another clause that I'm going to let you name that seems to come up often, more importantly here in the city. But tell me how you dealt with the timing issues over there.
Well, they ran a pretty buttoned-up business, I have to say, Simon. And, this was many years ago.
Okay.
So 25 years ago.
Sure.
I don't remember the delivery issues being a huge problem.
Oh, good.
Of course, there were tough negotiations with the anchors, and the inline tenants came next. But they had that pretty well in hand.
Oh, good.
Now, Alan knew the people in Westbury. Yeah. So in terms of permitting and zoning, he had, I don't want to say an inside track, but he certainly knew who he had to talk to, and he was well known, respected, and maybe even loved, given the kind of guy he was.
That's fair. That's fair to say.
In Westbury. And Mel and Simon had the execution expertise to pull it off.
Oh, good, because I got guys, I know brokers throughout the island and in Jersey and whatever. They'll wait 3 years for a permit on a curb cut for a Starbucks. I mean, it's insanity.
It is insanity, and during that deal, and for much of my career, I didn't hear the same talk about that as I hear now. I have to say, in every deal I do, taking the permitting and delivery risk is a huge issue because whether it's in New York City, it's in the Midwest even, it's in upstate New York, it's in Westchester, it's in Jersey, Pennsylvania, the issue with getting permits and the regulatory hurdles are just insane. Yeah. They make no sense.
I know, and historically, New York City, and I know you've done a fair amount of leasing, but landlords here are loath to give a permit contingency, whereas a lot of these tenants that come from Kansas City or California or Texas, they walk in, every deal they do is subject to permits, and it's no big deal, and the landlords give it. And so, here in New York City, we don't do it.
Nobody's going to do that. But the real issue is you won't necessarily get a permit contingency, but when does the clock start ticking?
Yeah.
So the tenant has to get the permits that it has to get,
at
least for its work, but will the rent start be based on when the permit is received or based on delivery by the landlord?
That's what I will tell you, that I'm on the landlord side and the tenant side, so I argue from both sides. But 90+% of the New York City landlords will say the clock starts ticking, which is usually the start of a free rent period.
Correct.
Upon delivery of possession, because there's going to be a certain, you're going to negotiate a certain amount of landlord work and things like that. I hand you the keys, your clock's ticking. If you haven't figured out how to get permits, that's on you, Mr. Tenant. And most tenants that come, again, from out of state, they buckle on the first turn of the LOI, but then they get educated by their local brokers that this is how New York City works. And people don't love hearing, it's New York City. But the fact of the matter is, that's really the case. This, it's just, we give the response, hey, this is how you do it in New York. And you can't help but sound like a broker and a salesman when you say that, but it's the facts. It's the facts.
It's the facts, and it's beware to the tenant, especially a tenant that is not that well funded.
Right.
So a startup or a tenant that doesn't have a lot of dry powder, and the landlord also, they don't want the tenant to be out of business before they open.
Of course.
With a crazy issue with the city, which comes up more times than it doesn't. It also really pays to open up in a property that's owned by a landlord that knows what they're doing. Because the landlords that know their buildings and know what they're doing makes a huge difference.
You're 100% correct, except you can't always have that choice.
That's true.
Right? I always talk about how office leasing brokers, when they represent a tenant, and they say they want to be, at 49th and Madison in the area, well, they can choose from 10 buildings. But when the retailer says he wants to be at 49th and Madison, he has 4 corners to choose from. And 2 of them are banks, and they're not going anywhere, so now he's got 2 located. So you don't always get that choice and that landlord choice, as you allude to. So it's a little more challenging on the retail level.
Yes, absolutely.
But if you've given your druthers, and you could have, whether it's Rudin or Vornado or RXR, what we would call professional landlords who sort of, while they beat the snot out of you in a negotiation, they're the best partner to have going forward.
Absolutely. I could not agree more.
Yeah. So speaking of big landlords and big properties, and let's talk about Times Square. You touched on Times Square for Cheesecake Factory.
Yes.
But let's hit Times Square for real. right? SJP,
SJP.
big landlord,
Great client.
11 Times Square, and it's been written about, so we're going to talk about it. Monopoly is going to do a, I guess, experiential retail store.
Well,
You tell me more about it. That's
yes.
for you to tell me.
So Monopoly is a tenant that has one location in London. It's a British tenant. They have their intellectual property from Hasbro for the game Monopoly. And what they are going to be doing at Times Square, which is replicating to a large extent what they have in London, is building out a huge Monopoly game that people will play. I can't say I know exactly how it's going to work, but it's a very expensive build out. It's going to be a phenomenal space, along with restaurants and retail. 50,000 square feet at 11 Times Square, which is like Main and Main.
Absolutely.
You know, the density.
That's the southeast corner of 42nd and 8th.
Right. Incredible.
Yep.
So we negotiated that lease for 18 months, which is actually probably par for the course for that size deal and complexity.
No. I by the way, I don't even flinch at that number. Because some of the negotiations that go on in this city, when you deal with larger companies and larger landlords, and I've learned over the years, I don't blame one side or the other. Maybe one side is weighted more than the other, but negotiations today for a major chain on the retail side with a strong landlord is 9 to 12 months, and I'm talking about 2,500 square feet. Doesn't matter, because that's everybody's got, no offense, they're lawyers, and things take time, and it's not always the lawyer's fault by any stretch, but things just take time and the turn, and I find that, and I don't know if you see it, but maybe it's a brokerage thing. Things have never moved slower than they are moving now, transactionally. People are wanting to do deals, pursuing deals, but there is zero sense of urgency. I don't know. So again, you're on a billable hours thing, and I say that with respect. We're on a commission thing, so it can never be fast enough for us. But how are you seeing the flow of deals these days?
I would say I don't see things taking longer now than they have in the past, but I will tell you that urgency is the name of the game for me.
Okay.
Because time kills deals.
Absolutely.
And I get really frustrated when the other counterparties that I'm dealing with, whether it be my client as the landlord or tenant or the other party or their attorney, drags their feet, because there's nothing more dangerous.
Agreed.
Now, I will say in the Monopoly deal, the attorney on the other side was from California, and he and I got along terrifically. We both had the same approach to the deal, which is collegial, not adversarial, and we were both reasonable.
Okay.
So that took a lot of what could have been a much longer negotiating process out of the mix. But keep in mind, the tenant there was in London, the lawyer's in California, the landlord and I are in New York.
Right.
So that adds a level of complexity. But I would agree, deals are just agonizingly slow. Yeah. Agonizingly slow. And I have looked at that my whole career. I have taken the leasing process apart and put it back together, and I don't think that many of our counterparts have done that. What causes delays? I can tell you, not getting quick decisions. The landlord or the tenant not having internal communication processes that are quick. So it can take 2 weeks to get a decision from one party to another. That really delays the deal. And then, of course, if you have attorneys who are just trying to grandstand and make issues out of things that are not issues, rather than focusing on what they can negotiate based on the relative bargaining strength, and moving the deal to getting it closed.
What I have found in looking at this, I'm sure I did not do the type of assessment that you did, but in just thinking back over time, I look at things just, like years ago, a lot of what drove retail deals was Wall Street. Stores needed to open. They needed to open in a timely fashion. If a CEO was announced to Wall Street, he's going to do 10 stores in a quarter, he had to do 10, because if it was 9, the stock will drop like a rock, maybe for a day or two, but it will drop. And I have not seen that in the last probably 20 years, where Wall Street was driving. There are public companies that all have growth strategies, but they were not built on growing fast and insanely crazy. And I think of Kava is a prominent a QSR that's out there in the marketplace, and I've listened to him speak, the CEO speak about his growth. Yes, we're going to grow, but we're going to grow methodically. And I think the street, Wall Street, understands that a little bit better, because back in the day, I was involved in the drugstore business and the growth of the drugstore chains. I just remember, some to my benefit, some to my detriment, was like, we got to do 10 stores this quarter. And we had to do 10 stores. And there was a pressure point. And that from a brokerage perspective was great because it moved things quickly.
Yes.
But mistakes were made. And maybe that's part of it too. But I don't see that at all in terms of driving deals.
I don't see it either. And I saw it more on the landlord part, where the
Okay.
landlord had to get their quarterly numbers in
All right.
when they were public companies. So there was a
Same difference.
same
Yeah.
thing. Huge push and urgency
Sure.
to get those leases signed by the end of the quarter,
Yeah.
or else.
Yeah.
And I haven't seen that lately either.
Yeah. And I think that's, again, I think we could sit here till the cows come home and try to figure it out, but we'll never figure it out. It's going to go at the pace it's going to go. I'm seeing lately now people are taking pause, and we'll have this episode will air in the next couple of weeks. But certainly there are people around town waiting to see what this election is going to look like.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of real estate people just wanting to see what happens. And from today, and we're sitting here taping on September 9th, okay, to air date, I don't know exactly what it is. It'll be prior to Election Day, but from September 9th to November 4th, in our world,
Yes.
that's 2 minutes. And so people will wait 2 more minutes to see what happens and then figure out next steps. So just another bump in the road, as they say.
Right.
So at the completion of Monopoly, again, they're very exciting. 50,000 feet. I'm assuming multi-level.
Multi-level, yes.
That's very, very, very exciting. Do you know offhand when they're planning on opening?
I think they are scheduled to open in the early part of 2026.
Okay. All right. Good. That's also around the corner.
Right.
Around the corner. Another thing I like to bring up, because you are not the first attorney that I've spoken with on the show, is there a clause or two that you see that hits almost every time, where it doesn't stop a deal, but it causes everybody to take a minute and wrestle over? Is there one or two clauses that hit you each and every time?
Absolutely. The one that comes to mind most often is the one you talked about, delivery and delivery conditions, timing and conditions of delivery. What is the landlord responsible for? When will they deliver? What are the penalties for late delivery? And what is the tenant responsible for? And that is the trickiest provision. And I always encourage my clients to be extraordinarily specific about just what each one is doing,
Right.
and what are the ramifications for not achieving it within a certain period of time. And I can tell you a horror story, actually.
Please.
I worked on a headquarters office lease in Miami, and this was in 2021. We signed in early 22, and the market there was hot, hot, hot. And we had very little bargaining power, especially since my client wanted to be able to, the CEO of this hedge fund wanted to be able to walk to work. There were not that many buildings
Okay.
that met, his needs, his firm's needs, within walking distance of his apartment.
Okay.
So we were locked into a particular building, and the landlord fought us tooth and nails.
Did the landlord know that? Did he use that to his advantage, knowing how how this guy wanted to be positioned?
I'm sure he did.
Okay.
I'm sure he, JLL, one of the big firms, was the broker, and I'm sure they understood that the market was just hot and
Right.
tenants didn't have much leverage. So we had no penalties for late delivery. And in fact, there really wasn't even a delivery date in the lease. And I told my client what how much at risk he was, but he wanted the space and signed anyway. Do you know it took 2 years
Wow.
to get into the space? I kid you not, 2 years, because the landlord just couldn't get the necessary permits from the city of Miami Beach.
I would have had a side note. You personally, I would have had a side note to protect you, just given that.
I had all my notes, in the margin.
Yeah,
No,
sure.
and my client,
Yeah.
they understood. I'm really good guys.
Right.
So
But sometimes it doesn't work out that way, and then of course, and I've been around where you don't deliver on time, and then there's day for day, and then there's 2 for 1,
Oh,
and there's 3
absolutely.
for 1, and
termination rights and
Termination rights.
reimbursement of costs.
of course. I had we represent Lenwich, which is a sandwich shop around the city, you know.
Yep.
Years ago, one of the first deals, and I was with this at the time when I was over at Winnick Realty. Jeff and I were partners over there, and we did this Lenwich deal, and we were representing the sub-landlord, happened to be a little bank called Chase. It was after one of their mergers, and they had this sublease space. And they couldn't deliver to Lenwich in time. We negotiated a deal day for day. Lenwich operated for 3 years at no rent. 3 years at no rent because of the delayed delivery. Stuck it out, and to this day, it's still one of his top stores. He's got a direct deal with the landlord. But his first 3 years were on Chase's dime.
That's amazing.
Right? It doesn't happen very often, you know, and everybody's lawyers are tougher these days. But yeah.
What a fiasco! Because even though they operated for 3 years without paying rent, they had 3 years of not producing a profit that they had to force.
And that's what they have, and that's what various companies have to fight through. So
Yep.
he was small, up and comer. He could figure it out, and he can go negotiate that lease over there while this is all happening, whatever. But when you have larger companies and you're negotiating a deal, and it gets into their internal system from an operating perspective and hiring perspective and management and you have those things. So that's interesting. That's one. We found a new clause. I represent a company called Panda Express.
We've heard of them.
So we've learned a lesson with them that we changed the LOI format. So we did a deal a few years ago downtown irrelevant where it's located, but we did not have a provision as it related to Con Ed. Okay, and so they built the store, landlord delivered the premises, Panda took it, built the store, ready to open the doors. Con Ed decided they were going to show up when they were going to show up. Okay, and if it wasn't Panda in terms of the size of the company, they paid 9 months of dead rent with a fully built store, waiting for Con Ed to show up. And every time Con Ed said, oh, yeah, maybe next Tuesday, maybe next. So 9 months. So now we rewrote the LOI, basically that the clock stops. That if it's no fault of yours, Mr. Landlord, no fault of ours, Panda Express, and it's Con Ed or it's a utility that's holding us up from opening, the clock has to stop. We're committed. We're spending $2 million to build out a store. We're not going anywhere. You got to hang in there with us. And so that's one of our heavily negotiated provisions.
Yeah, because the landlord's not going to like that.
Yeah, and there were various ways around it.
As you noted before about permit contingencies. Not a contingency of the
Yeah.
deal, it's a contingency of the rent
Right,
commencement.
it's an uncontrollable contingency. You can't even, pin it on
Correct.
anything. So,
And you hear horror stories about that all the time.
yeah, so we work through some of those things. So, look, I think that you have put out stuff here in this conversation that we're going to promote you. I think that, I'm going to make sure all of my brokers know about you and your experience because I think you bring a lot to the table.
Thank you.
I knew that coming in. That's why I wanted to sit with you, but I liked listening to some of the stories. You have landlord side, you have tenant side, and I think that will be a way for us to get involved and do some deals together.
Hey, I love that.
Great. And
I love that.
I'm so glad. And all that.
And likewise.
Of course. All that being said, I can't thank you enough for spending some time with me. I love listening to the story, like I said, and I look forward to doing business with you down the road.
Terrific. It's been a blast. What
Great.
a pleasure.
Thanks, Ellen.